ready to discuss across the two breakouts?
Yes.
Carla, welcome back to the plenary. I hope you had a fruitful discussion. We certainly had.
Yes, very much so. Very interesting.
Right, so why don't you go first and briefly summarize the key points that you talked about?
Yes, sure. So we had a panel consisting of 4 panelists. We have Johan from City Networks, who is running a European cloud provider. We have Xavier from HPE, who has started the Cloud 28 Plus initiative, which is an experience platform for European cloud providers where they can federate their services. We have Albert from World Sensing, which is an edge-to-cloud technology provider. And we have Pavel from AI Investments, who's using technology that comes from the Melody project to optimize how to run algorithms in a multi-cloud world. So we have basically the whole stack from infrastructure to federation to edge to AI. And we had some interesting discussions about is it good enough that we just focus on the data layer like we're trying with Gaia X, or does infrastructure matter? And that was discussed quite interestingly, because of course infrastructure matters, but at the moment the focus is very much on the data layer. And then one of the key takeaways that came out is that actually when we talk about discussing the success of European cloud providers or building European cloud providers, it's not just a technology discussion, but it's just as much a discussion about making European cloud services visible and known to the market, and investing in the advertisement capability to make sure that European cloud providers, but also European data sets are as well known as the services from companies who have huge marketing budgets. So that is a short summary, I would say. Next.
Very good. Thank you, Carla. We also had a very interesting panel. We had Rainer Posch, who was the CIO for the Austrian federal government and an academic. We had Barry Lowry, who was the CIO for the Irish government. Martin Diaz from Logius, who was the Digital Competency Center for the Ministry of Interior in the Netherlands, providing services across the government. And we had Paul Mund representing Sodalite, which is a research and innovation project looking at various orchestration deployments capability across the cloud to edge continuum and optimizing the usage of resources in data intensive type of workloads and use cases. I think the key point that were discussed from a public sector perspective is that the public sector starts from some pretty complex characteristics. First of all, it's a multi-stakeholder environment, right? It's not one company with one bottom line. So even at the national level, it's difficult to bring everybody on the same page and create a roadmap to embrace the cloud as a mean for innovation and digital innovation for government. We talked about the fact that governments handle quite sensitive data workloads as well, right? So they need to think of digital sovereignty, both from a technical and a legal perspective, and both from a data protection and a resiliency perspective. And Barry from Ireland talked a little bit about how in their cloud computing node they provide advice, not just on whether to move to the cloud. That's a question that they've already answered and said yes to, but how and when and with what tools and capabilities. And then both Martin and Paul were a little bit more towards the technical capabilities in their contribution, and they talked about the need to leverage the tools that exist today and develop new tools to make efficient use of resources and make it intuitive to deploy and orchestrate workloads across different environments, right? Leveraging open source wherever it's possible and open standards to make migration and switching off and integrating data possible. And Martin, I think, raised an interesting point, which we found also in our research around the skills and the fact that embracing cloud is also an organizational change journey and not just a technical journey, right? So those were some of the things that we discussed. And then the final point was brought up by the audience, by Yuri from Deutsche Telekom, which generated quite a bit of interesting discussion, which was the environmental sustainability, right? Migrating to cloud brings us to more efficient computing resources, but we also need to think of how to federate those resources to make the system as a whole in Europe greener. And then the addition of the edge creates a new set of questions and opportunities to become more efficient, because you don't have to stream all of the data to the cloud, but then you have some capacity that consumes energy at the edge, and how to optimize that is an additional problem and an opportunity.
Very interesting. We didn't really get to sustainability in detail, but I think one of the questions that I would like to maybe ask of your panel, Max, that was the first question that came up in our discussion, and that is, how important is it to you that you are interacting with the European headquartered cloud provider?
Yeah.
Does it matter, or is it not relevant?
Yeah, Barry, maybe you want to take that one if you're still online. I think you brought up in your cloud computing notes slide the fact that we're working with some of the local providers as well in Ireland, right? So maybe you want to address that.
Well, of course, Ireland is in a unique position because we're also the European headquarters of many of the global cloud providers, as well as, having relationship with indigenous and European cloud providers. So our attitude tends to be, let's focus on what we're trying to achieve and who can help us achieve it, rather than be very specific about who that happens to be. So we're much more focused on the journey and the outcome of the journey rather than how to get there.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, that came out as well, that it's mainly a business decision. It's not so much a political decision or a decision based on maybe compliance needs, but it's really a business decision. And I think that's what you're saying as well, right? So who can get the job done?
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be a business decision. I think there's a danger of it becoming politicized. We've seen this at a global state where we've seen, especially in the last American president, although he still thinks he's the current one, that, where protectionism and so on, and how national law tries to take precedence over European and global law. That's not a good place for technologists to be in terms of trying to deliver better services and a better society using digital technology. So hopefully we'll go through a period of much more stability where it's very much about what we're actually trying to achieve rather than the politics involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Maybe, Carla, a question for your panelists, right? From the private sector perspective, how do they look at the public sector and also all of these concerns and real concerns around the data sovereignty, and what are the implications if we want to federate resources at the European level, where public sector is front and center, but needs to deal with the expectation of the policymakers that want to retain some level of control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think I will start with you, Johan, maybe if you want to give an answer here.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, you guys are right, of course, the public sector has a lot more complexity, I would say, as far as in terms of regulations and so forth in general. But I would say that even though, unfortunately, there's been a lot of laws and data laws that have been broken for a long period of time, since July and the Court of Justice and the decision, I think that there's a much greater awareness And I think it's super important for all of us, government or private, to realize that these laws are not just there for fun. Data is something that's very valuable. It can also be very harmful, whether you're an adult or a child, right? So I think that what I'm seeing and what we're seeing in general is that the private sector are taking these laws a lot more seriously today. GDPR was a stunt in 2018. Now things are starting to mature and it's becoming real. But again, like we talked in our panel there's several layers of laws that you have to start really looking at for you to be able to continue to innovate and to make those business decisions that we're talking about. And again, we debated there, like laws should be a business decision, right? I mean, you'd think that features is not number one or whatever. It's good. Let's be legal first and then let's make the business decisions after that. So I find that conversation a little strange, to be honest with you, because I think it's super important. I also think it's a big driver for us in Europe to be able to compete with the big tech giants, because ultimately that's something that's super important. So we see a change in attitude in the private sector, and laws are becoming more important.
Right.
Maybe I can, Carla, sorry to interrupt. I can ask Paul to comment quickly on the point of legal aspects and compliance, because in the Sodalite project, they're embedding, if I understand correctly, very much the compliance aspects and the ability to do audit logs and to deal with the fact that some of these use cases will be cross-border in nature, and embedding those capabilities right in the architecture that they're developing. Paul, if you want to comment on that.
I'm afraid Paul has left us.
Oh, okay. Okay. I thought he was still around.
Okay.
Well, we'll take his comment offline.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. I would like to also ask Xavier if you want to comment on the question of what you're doing in terms of helping public sector customers to find the right infrastructure or the right service provider in Europe.
Yeah. So hi everyone. So with the experience that we had with Cloud 28 Plus, this platform, this is open to anyone. And if I look at what the French Ministry of Interior, the French Ministry of Ecology have been joining Cloud 28 Plus as a member of this digital business platform, because they wanted to learn from the private sector. So all of that needs to be seen from a global perspective of digital transformation for the public sector, which is a long way to go and a lot of things to be done. And the experience that the private sector is developing is very interesting for the public sector. All the more so as in our case, at the end of the day, since they had a big issue to accelerate the digital transformation, they have been asking us to take our code and to implement it for them. So this was an interesting situation, because we had created Cloud 28 Plus, and it was for the ecosystem of the partners of Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and to push the service providers who were working with us on the market. And the analysis that was done by the French government was to say, if it is accelerating the private sector, why wouldn't we use it for the public sector? And why wouldn't we implement a digital business platform like that to accelerate our own transformation on the citizens to go? So I believe that the public sector is looking a lot at what the private sector is doing. Another example I can tell you is that and I'm sure it is the same in many, many countries in Europe now, you have different security levels in the clouds of the governments. And most of the time, you have one which is not critical information, and governments are authorizing that administration are officially sourcing without RFPs, but specific RFPs, but with a global agreement, some cloud services from third parties, meaning a private sector. This is the case in France, for instance. It is called the C3, when the French government organizations, administration, central or local, can now, without launching a tender, purchase from private sector if the conditions are met for, of course, security kind of workloads and so on. So I believe there is a big evolution. And I see that not only in France, in Gaia X, what we see also is that there is more and more discussion between the public sector and the private sector in order that we come to solutions that can be put in place and serving the two components.
Great, thank you very much, Xavier.
Very good. Maybe one last question for Barry, right? If you could steal something from the private sector, if you were a private sector enterprise, what would you do faster or better in your environment?
Well, we do try and learn from the private sector. I mean, if you take the whole digital government initiative, it's very much driven by, first of all, what we saw from organizations like Amazon, and then moving into wider retail, and then things like travel and airline booking and so on. And finally, the banks, which we would see as being the closest to us. But the reality is that, you know, government will never give up on its stakeholders, its citizens, even if they're not prepared to go for the digital journey. So we're always trying to follow this two-track approach where we try and drive more people to use online services to free up resources to give a better service to those people who are unable to use those services. So the choice is really important. You know, it's very interesting, for example, that the likes of Denmark has actually passed legislation which says if you can use digital government online, you must do, because obviously that enables them to take care of those who can't much more easily. We haven't gone that way yet, but we have set a target that by the end of 2023, 90% of our services will be consumed digitally. And that does require us then to try and evolve quickly. And in doing so, we'll take a lot of advice from the private sector and look very carefully at what they're doing.
Yeah. And you made a point in your presentation, Barry, that during the COVID emergency, you had an accelerated need to scale some workloads and the cloud helped from that perspective. So maybe that's a question also for your panelists, Carla. Has COVID been an inflection point from a private sector perspective?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if who wants to take this one. Maybe we can get a short quote from each of you.
From our point of view, it hasn't been huge, right? We're not like a Zoom or anything like that. We do see that the private sector has been affected, but mostly I would say that, you know, digital initiatives have potentially been postponed to some extent, right? But I think that those projects are kicking into gear at this point. So I don't see a huge, more than some procrastination, I would say.
On my side, I have seen a big move to cloud for VDI globally, which is a workload that has been a very, very big push. Of course, everything around collaboration and so on. I can tell you, it was amazing because through what we have done with the French government, we have been working on the project during the pandemic. And it went in production during the pandemic. So I can tell you one thing, you know, you launch a very, very deep project, which is impacting really the life of a civil servant. And at the end of the day, even if there is a pandemic, it happens. So it means that the government had already in place the means, partially at least, the means to execute. So workloads, of course, collaboration, VDI, all of this stuff has been absolutely skyrocketing. It has been something absolutely amazing. But the other part of the equation is that we have seen that on the core project for the government, because they knew it could durate this pandemic, they have accelerated projects such as the ones of transformation that we are driving.
Yeah. Thank you. And I don't know if we have Albert still on the line from World Sensing. I don't know if the pandemic has changed anything for you. Maybe not.
Yeah, I'm afraid Albert has left.
Okay. What about Pavel then from AI Investments? Is Pavel here? No.
Sorry.
Okay, good.
No, but I think I wanted to make a last point. And if I remember one of the early conversations we had when I interviewed you, Barry, for this project, you said we didn't realize, and I'm probably misquoting you, but we didn't realize how much valuable investment we had made in terms of remote orchestration, deployment, and monitoring capabilities until we had all to work from home, right?
Yeah.
So the point that Xavier was making about the fact that the public sector has already made some interesting investment in this area, but not sweated the assets as much as it could. That's probably one of the impacts of COVID that has forced you and your colleagues around Europe, Barry, to sweat those assets.
Yeah, funny enough, some of the learnings of that, because we had the technology to flip very quickly from office work to homework. We literally went from 20% homework to 80 to 90% homework within 2 to 3 days. But of course, that throws up very different challenges, because actually the physical building is almost the first layer of your security. And if you don't have the physical building there, then you need to reevaluate your security and see, is it appropriate for a circumstance where everybody will be online all the time? And so some of those challenges threw themselves up very quickly. And we were able to deal with them very quickly as well. You know, even things like video conferencing between two organizations where they each had their own tool, because they only ever met each other within themselves. You know, that was a challenge. But I think it's been a great learning to us all. And I guess the final thing I would like to say is, you know, about the contact tracing app, because I think the contact tracing app was a great example of where you had people with an interest in privacy, people with an interest in safety and how data can be used for safety, and a private sector who were very interested in how technology can help deal with a national problem, coming together and together being able to build something that was very special. And you know, that's why we're particularly proud of our contact tracing app, because all stakeholders were involved and we developed a solution which everyone felt was the best we could possibly do.
Right, and that is a good sign also in terms of the potential of then tackling even bigger projects and opportunities like federating resources at the European level. Right?
Absolutely, you know, and wouldn't it be nice? We're now in a situation where any public servant in Ireland can find their equivalent in another public service body. But wouldn't it be nice if we could do that at a European level, and you could see whether their presence is there, and you can meet them for a quick conversation. You know, that's if we're serious about working together to build a stronger Europe, that's the sort of scenario we've got to be working towards.
Great, thank you. Carla, any closing remark? I know we're at the end of our session.
No, I think it's great also to bring these two conversations together, because I think we're working towards the same goals, to use IT in the best possible way to provide services to either citizens or customers. And I think there is a lot of learnings that can be exchanged right from both sides. So I think it's great to discuss it together. I think from my side, what stuck with me from this conversation is really that you know, if we want to strengthen the European sector, cloud sector, I think we need to also vote with our wallets to some extent, you know, and European cloud providers if we want them to grow, and without becoming protectionist, Barry, to your point, but maybe evaluate if the services are interesting and could be used. I think also one of the things that came out very clearly from our discussion was the need to invest in greater visibility of services, what is actually available from Europe, from European players, and to advertise them to a larger degree, but also skills. Now we didn't have time to talk about that, but Albert mentioned the point that if he wants to hire a cloud architect, typically they have skills in one of the global hyperscalers, but they don't have skills necessarily in the European providers' technology stack. So I think that's another area that could potentially be addressed to help build momentum in the European cloud market.
Great. So thank you to all of the panelists for participating.